Hello there, my name is Colin R. Turner and welcome to my little Open Economy video mini-series. I'm hoping to make this into like 4 videos or so, all dealing with different aspects of the open economy idea. If you don't know, I am the author of something called the Free World Charter, which is like a 10-point document which outlines best practices for operating society sustainably and fairly on this planet. Of course, the most controversial part of that is that we're advocating a money-free world, a world without money whatsoever. A few months ago I wrote a book called Into the Open Economy, because what we're calling the idea is an open economy. I'll explain a little bit later why that's called that and what exactly it's about. But of course, before we can do any solving any problems, we have to understand the problems. So the ideas that I put in the book, I thought they were so important and also so simple and even so familiar to people already that I thought it would be the best way to get the idea out is to actually put it into a video form. The book itself is quite short, but the videos will be hopefully not too long and maybe 4 or 5 parts of each. So this one I'm going to deal with the problems, because if we can't solve anything until we understand the problem, until we know the problems and we understand the problems and why they're there and how they work. So this is what I'm hoping to address in this video. Please subscribe to the channel or add yourself onto the Free World Charter mailing list or something like that if you want to keep anyway, these will all be freely available on YouTube. So anyway, I hope you'll join me for the rest. So beginning with the problems, okay, I'm going to go list down through the basic problems that really are facing society and the world as a whole. I think most people already know these, but anyway, we're starting off first with economic growth. We have this notion that we have to keep economic growth going, we have to keep having jobs, we have to keep consuming, we have to keep providing things. Obviously, it doesn't take a genius to work out that you just can't keep doing that on a planet with finite resources. So somehow we have to stop doing that. Somehow we have to stop doing that. Okay. On top of that, economic growth, you have obviously population expansion, where like the huge exponential rates of population expansion, talking about in the order of 10 billion souls here by 2040. So obviously the constant consumption of resources coupled with continuing population growth, I mean, it really doesn't take a genius to work out that this is on a collision course and it's not going to keep going like that. Okay, coupled with that, then we have very important is we have destruction of our natural habitat. Because we have this drive to keep the industry and agriculture going, we're basically destroying the forests, we're destroying the natural scrubland, and pretty much taking over with monocrop culture and stuff like that, which is basically affecting the biodiversity of the species. And of course, we all know the problems of bees, for example, where the bees are severely being threatened, and without bees, we're going to lose about 40% of our edible crops. So natural habitat is very, very important. Of course, we have, as we all know, we have income inequality. We have a huge amount of people living on less than $2 a day, maybe like half the population of the planet or something like that. And of course, we have maybe 100 people who own half the rest of the world's wealth. So we have massive income inequality. Unemployment. Unemployment is something that is like the slippery thing that governments are always kind of battling with. And interestingly about that, the governments are always trying to find ways to get the unemployed figures down. And they do that really in kind of quite clever accounting ways, more so than actually creating the jobs. They find ways to actually take people away from that deadly unemployed list. So they're trying to get the percentage down all the time. But if you look at the actual figures of people who are who are of a working age, then it's much higher than would be what they generally suggest as the unemployed figures. I know in America, for example, that if you stop actively seeking work after 2 years, then they drop you off this list. You don't exist anymore. You don't even count as being unemployed. So, okay, the other thing is then we obviously have what I would call bad behavior. Bad behavior is basically where we are prioritizing profit over pretty much anything else, because the desire to profit and to gain and to get material wealth is so strong that pretty much everything else suffers as a result. The communities suffer, the environment suffers, our own relationships suffer. We put the emphasis on profit too strongly, and then we kind of lose the other things which are more important. Obviously, another thing then is we have bad production methods. We have factories that are producing goods extremely cheaply and extremely of low quality, and the result of that is then that the thing you buy breaks and you have to go and buy it again a couple of years later or whatever. And so what happens is then you're wasting resources by continually making these items, when if you had just made them well in the first place, this wouldn't be the case. And the last one, and for me maybe the most important, is, excuse my writing this angle, the most important one is disconnection. Because the disconnection is basically when you're so, like the bad behavior here, where you're so focused on the material wealth and material gain and on the market system and trading, that we lose this connection between ourselves, each other, and the environment. So because we pay for people to do things for us, or we pay to have things delivered to us, we're not connected or understanding of how and where these things come from. But this connection is really important, because without that connection, we're not seeing ourselves as part of the greater organism, which you have to see that our planet is a closed living system, so it's a single organism really, and we're all just parts of that organism. Okay, so if you go down through that list, you'll see that behind all of these, behind everything here, is really what I would call our primary methods of conducting society, which is trade and governance. So trade and governance, let's put these over here. Trade and governance. This is basically how we conduct our society. We use trade to deal with get the things that we need for a living, and we use governments to control the population and to regulate industry and that sort of thing. So trade and governance are what I would call the primary methods of conducting society. And with all these problems in mind, the trade and governance are pretty much, as far as to my mind, and what to most people think now, is what's behind these things. But most people would have different solutions to those problems. So my solution then is pretty much, which I will talk about in the next video, is about removing this market system. But I'll get into the detail later how we would do that. But we'll talk about the limitations of these. Let's start with the limitations of governance. You have to see that governance or government is really nothing more as an outgrowth of the trade system or the market system. The government really only exists to actually make sure that all that market system works well, or works reasonably logically or fairly, I suppose. This is what they attempt to do. So the government really is there to kind of oversee the trade system, to regulate things, to make sure people don't go too far or too less, like that. So, but if you imagine we didn't have money, if we didn't trade things at all, we didn't actually use a market system like we do now, it becomes difficult to see what government would actually do, because they don't really do a whole lot else except actually trying to just be a watchdog on the economy. So the government really it's part of the economy. It's subject to the economy, and all the politicians who work with the government are all subject to the economy themselves. Everyone is all we're all part of this market system. We're trading and we're working and exchanging our labour and our property and stuff like that. So the government really, all it does is react to the economy. It doesn't really do much. In terms of nationality and the borders and the nations that governments really represent, well, I mean, you could almost argue that the only reason that government exists or the only reason nations exist is to actually justify the existence of government in the first place. Because most people that you meet that really don't care too much about the nationalities or the borders that they come from. And when you think about it, we're all kind of, so whoever is proud of their country, really, they don't have anything, they haven't actually done anything to be proud of. And the people that that actually built the country in the first place or invaded it, and is usually the case, these people are long since dead. So really, it's this kind of this patriotism that we have is really imaginary. That really, it's something that we pretend that is important, but actually it doesn't really make any difference. Most people don't care what part of the world they live in, or what flag they're under. It's just the borders are almost just like a nuisance. And of course the government, who these are by far the most vocal people about countries. These are the ones who talk about the country the most, and probably the reason is because it justifies their existence the most. So the most flags you'll see will be waved by the government, and not that many other people. Another function of government supposedly is law, that the government creates law that governs people's behaviour. Well, I mean, obviously you have to think about law. Why does law exist? In fact, really, with all these things, if you break them down and think about, like, if just ask the next question beyond and say, why is this happening? Why is this like this? So why do we need laws? Well, we need laws because, like, some people do bad things, yeah? But then why do some people do bad things? What is the governing, the governing criteria that makes these people do bad things? And if you break it down, you'll find that a lot of the people who are in sort of bad social situations, for example, are the people who commit the most crime, the people who have the most poverty, or who were brought up in families which had a lot of poverty and disparity, and maybe like were socially outcast or whatever, or socially marginalized. These people are the people who offend the most and who fill the most prisons. So the law really is actually a product, in a way, of a system that kind of doesn't serve the people. Because we have a system where we have this massive income inequality, which is completely legal and completely legitimate, even though in years to come that will sound crazy. So we have all these things, and then so people are outcast and marginalized by that system, and as a result of which they become desperate and they resort to crime. So law really is, again, it's something it's governing our behavior because the system that we're using is not working to begin with. Okay, so that's government. What about trade? Most rational people believe that trade is an absolutely non-negotiable fact of life, that you have to trade in order to live, and this is the way to. We have like phrases like, you don't get something for nothing, no such thing as a free lunch. All these things are absolute currency in our conversations of today. So what is trade? Well, trade really comes out of scarcity. If it's difficult to find something, or if it's difficult to make something, you have scarcity, and when you have scarcity, then trade kind of appears. So it means, like, if I can't get what I need, but you have what I need, and I have what you need, then we'll trade for those things, and everyone goes home happy, and that's fine. So that's how trade works, and it's perfectly rational how it appears. So what's wrong with that? Well, this is like a textbook version of trade. So you have to argue that if this textbook version of trade is not working, because if you take this thing and then you have all these problems as a result of that, then you have to say, well, this textbook problem, this textbook version of trade is actually not working. Because in the long run, when you bring that out here, you expand that, you have all these problems, social problems, you have basically people who are miserable as a result of that. And it's all very well, most people in the Western world are pretty much well off, but you have to remember that the vast majority of the population would be in poverty. So you can say that for definite that the actual trade, even though it sounds like a lovely theory, it doesn't actually work in practice for the majority of the people. Okay. And the other part of trade is like you're trading your labor, like employment, unemployment. And the other thing with that is that the technology is now replacing jobs so fast, and so many jobs, that these jobs are never coming back. And so your ability to trade your labor even is becoming harder and harder. So this is why your unemployment is going up and that sort of stuff. So really the trade system that we kind of more or less think is absolutely central to our existence is actually causing all these problems. So when you break it down, even the government is part of the trade system, and the trade eventually, when you expand it and when you get to where we are today, it brings you to all these problems, and the consumer culture and the idea that we have to just keep on gaining and hoarding stuff like that. And this is why we have income inequality, because we have this hoarding and scarcity mentality. So that has to stop. And I don't think there's anyone who would disagree with the fact that the way we're actually running the world now at the moment has to change radically, because these problems are not sustainable in the long term. It'll be okay for us, but it's not, maybe not for our children or our children's children. These is only getting worse, and we're losing like vast amounts of our fellow species here. So you got to remember, we are in a closed living system. We're all in a bubble in space, okay? And we have to work together. If we're not working together, then we're destroying each other. There's no other way. There's no stasis. There's nothing in between. If we're not actually working together in a group way, then we're basically destroying this organism that we all share. So this disconnection. Probably the most important thing, I'm going to talk about more of this in later videos, but the disconnection that we're talking about is obviously, if you look for people who are selling things very cheaply, like things are like bargains and stuff like that, which we buy. You see a TV for sale for half price and you run and buy that TV, but we never think about where that came from or what corners were cut to make that sort of bargain. So this is all part of the disconnection as well, the disconnection with the effects of our actions. So unless we're becoming more connected and more aware of the fact that we're on this closed living system, then pretty much we're on the path to destruction, so that has to change. Anyway, so there you go. That's kind of a basic outline of the problems. This is the first video in the series. Part 2 will be on there next week. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, I'm going to start talking about the solutions that are in this book. But like I say, you don't need to buy the book, because everything is going to be done on this little short video mini series. And so I hope you'll stay out and join me with that in the next video. Okay, thanks. Hello, this is Colin Turner again in the second part of my video series, The Open Economy. The first part I was dealing with the problems of the system that we face today. If you don't know, this book, Into the Open Economy, is really what this video series is about. So I'm actually serializing the ideas from this book into the video series. If you haven't watched the first video, please go back and have a look at it, because it gives a good outline of the actual problems that we're facing today and why we need an open economy and what it's all about. So this one I'm going to deal with the solutions of what I think can solve those problems that were in the first video. But before we actually dive into the solutions, I just want to do a little pause for thought for a second, because one of the problems that I found, and you will find once you're starting to talk to people about these ideas, is that people will say that this is not possible, that people are programmed a certain way, people are greedy, and this is never going to work. Well, we really have to tackle that straight on, is to say that this is absolute nonsense. The whole reason that we have evolved to such a fantastic level is because we are so adaptable, because we're so smart and we're so clever, and we're able to adapt to our environment. That's the reason why we're so successful in evolutionary scale. So when somebody says you can't do something, really that's what they're saying. They're actually locked in a mindset of something. So we need to be more aware that we are actually extremely programmable individuals, that we can pretty much do anything we want once we actually put our minds to it, and en masse with many people. So that's the first thing. Just to not to be afraid of somebody who says that some things aren't going to work, because almost everything is impossible to begin with when you hear it the first time. But this, of course, is not. Everything is a choice. So the open economy, then, this is really what I'm proposing as a solution to the problems that you would have seen in the first video. And the open economy, really, I came up with this phrase. Open really is from the open source industry, which is kind of like where computer programs are made in a way it's shared, it's free, it's decentralized. And economy, of course, we know is just the management of resources, the effective management of resources. So open economy then really is what we're talking about, is a shared, decentralized and free economy where people are more geared towards the group interest rather than the self-interest. Our current system really predates on self-interest, where we're all trying to amass and get as much as possible, where the open economy is where we actually prioritize group interest over self-interest. And the reason we do that is because it actually will create a better abundance and better life for everybody. If you imagine, for example, if you imagine the earth as like a barrel of fish, for example, and everyone's fishing from the same barrel, trying to take resources, trying to take what they want from that barrel. If everyone is working to their own interest, eventually you're just going to run out of fish inside this barrel. But if people work in group interest, where people are dedicated to certain tasks like improving the water quality, or developing better technology, or preparing the food, when you have this kind of a group interest, that everyone is actually getting the maximum benefit from the same resources. So really, when you central to the idea of the open economy is moving from self-interest to group interest. And we almost don't have a choice about that anymore, because if you imagine how we're all aspiring to material wealth and success, that if we all actually achieved that, if we all achieved the material wealth and success that we want, it would be an absolute catastrophe to the environment. So we're selling this dream that we all have to amass a certain amount of material wealth. But actually, if it really happened, it would be an absolute catastrophe on the planet. So we have to stop aspiring to this illusory idea of wealth acquisition and look more towards connection and happiness and just a general state of fulfillment, because at the end of the day, this is what we all want. So the open economy then really is principally about moving our priorities from self-interest to group interest. If you imagine where we all prioritize ourselves maybe as number one, and then maybe a little bit down that list, we're kind of going to prioritize the community or the people that we know. And then even further down the list again, we're going to prioritize the world and the environment as such. But really, those two bottom aspects of the community and the world, we need to move them up really, really much higher. We have to prioritize the community almost as much as we do ourselves, and the planet and the wider commonwealth. We have to look after all these things almost as important as ourselves, because we ourselves can't survive without those two other aspects. We must have community, we must have the people we know, we must have the planet and environment in good shape in order for us to survive and our children to survive in the future. So first thing is, the open economy is moving the priorities from much higher, from lower down to much higher than they are today. And then the second part is really just removing the sort of artificial limits, that the things that hold us back in society today, which would be like trade and money and governments and borders, even religions to some degree, cultures to some degree. All these things are like artificial limits that we're kind of imposing ourselves, that are dividing us, and it's not really helping us all work together in the group interest. So these things are preventing us from working in the group interest. So once we all recognize our commonality and work in this group interest, then we can realize an open economy. So that's really just the basic outline of the solutions and description of the open economy. There's going to be a couple more videos in this series. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube so you get the latest one when it comes out. If you're a signatory on the Free World Charter, then you will also get this in an email anyway. So be sure to make sure and subscribe to that mailing list. That's all for now. In the next video, I'm going to be dealing more about how we actually actualize that, how we actually bring the open economy into action today. It's actually really, really easy to do. It's just that it requires a little bit of shift in priorities and a change of habits, I guess. So that's it. So please join me in the next video, which will be released next week, where we're going to deal with the next phase of the open economy. I hope you enjoy me. Thanks very much. Hello everyone, Colin Turner again. This is video number 3 of my series, The Open Economy. If you haven't seen the first 2, check them out. The first one is where I'm dealing with the problems of society, outlining everything. And the second one, actually defining the solution, which I believe is the open economy, which is basically a group interest economy where we're all here to serve each other rather than here to serve ourselves. Anyway, check out video number 2 for more information on the open economy. On this video, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through let's go through some ideas of actually how things will work in a practical way. The day-to-day running of the open economy. A lot of people would wonder, like, well, how do you do this? How do you allocate resources? How do you deal with crime? How do you deal with ownership and all that sort of stuff? So I'm just going to run down through these things. Like I say, everything is in the book Into the Open Economy if you want. I'm going to go through these quite quickly, but it takes a while. But if you're interested in more, check out the book. It's only like 90 pages or something, the book, and it'll give you a good idea of all this kind of stuff as well. Okay, so the first one I want to deal with is what I would call social gravity. And because we are a social species, I define this thing as social gravity means that we want to come together. We more or less want to work together. We work better as when we're cooperating. We work better in each other's company, I suppose. We're not really hardwired to be lone predators, for example. You know, in the animal world, you have a good example. You have lone predators, which are like eagles or sharks or whatever like that. And then you also have pack animals like monkeys or like zebras or buffalo. So you have there's 2 types of animal, really, the lone predators and the social animals. And we are the social animals like all primates. So social gravity really is what binds the social species. We all basically want to be in each other's company. So this is critical, really, for understanding the idea of an open economy, where we're coming from a market system where we're all kind of fighting and battling it out for resources and jobs and stuff like that. But when we don't have to do that anymore, we're naturally going to gravitate together and we're going to operate in groups. So social gravity is really important that you understand that this is basically the glue that keeps society together. So self-determination then is another aspect of an open economy. We're not talking about, there won't be any like prescribed law system or ways of defining people's behavior or trying to control people's behavior, because really we should be self-determining people. Animals, we should know more or less how to behave. We need to have a proper moral and education structure that helps shape our behavior. But in general, we more or less behave pretty well. You know, you have obviously you have some aberrant behavior, certainly in the market system where we're prioritizing self-interest. But even that aside, we still have aberrant behavior in terms of, you know, like serial killers and stuff like that, and these things. But these people are very, very, very much in a minority. We need to keep that focus. Media tells us that people are really bad, people are terrible, but that's actually not true. Just look at all the amount of people that you know yourself, the people that are basically good. Look at all the people in your own circle, and you'll find pretty much 99.999% of the people that you know are good people. They just want to live in peace and want to have a nice life and get on with people. So the actual aberrant behaviour that media and maybe the government try to peddle as being like really dangerous is actually statistically irrelevant. If you look at that, you look at stats of anything on this, the number of people killed by terrorists, number of people killed by toddlers with guns and stuff like that. So we have all this stuff which is blown out of all proportion in the media, but is actually statistically irrelevant. Okay, so with a society that kind of prioritizes group interest and is enlightened and is properly educated, we are absolutely safe to determine our own futures, because we will understand the benefits of moral behavior, apart from our inbuilt moral system anyway. With ownership, I would define something in the book called natural boundaries. We all have natural boundaries. You know when you encroach onto someone else's space. You know when someone is encroaching onto your space, even though there's no lines drawn anywhere. But there is a natural sense of I'm going too far, too close to this person, or they're coming too close to me. This is what we call natural boundaries. Then when we talk about like ownership of houses or ownership of property, it's kind of like putting a legal basis on this natural boundary. This object is mine, and you're not allowed to touch that. And then we put that into a legal framework. But actually, the empathic sense, if you like, of how we operate already determines our natural boundary. So, if you imagine that you eliminated all ownership of property, it's not like people are just going to come thundering into your house and saying, okay, this is my house now and you get out. People just don't operate like that. It's not socially acceptable. It's not moral. It just doesn't make sense to people. And of course, if you have an open economy where you don't have to pay for anything, everything is more or less guaranteed and given unconditionally, you don't have to bust into someone else's house. You can just go and have your own house somewhere else and have a better house the way you like it. So natural boundaries are something that's built into us anyway. So we don't really have to legitimize them into law the way we do now in a self-interest society, because it's not necessary. We can have abundance for everybody. We can all create all these things together. The next one, looking down my list, the next one is open education. Education is absolutely pivotal to the open economy. It's really, really critical how we actually deal with education. Currently, our education system really doesn't teach us anything about life. It just teaches us maths and geographical facts and that sort of stuff, which is all very well, but really it's not. It doesn't actually teach us anything useful about living or working with other people or feeling good about ourselves. It does nothing to address that. So the whole education system more or less has to go in the bin, and we have to start again with that. We have to start thinking about teaching the proper values of how we are aware of ourselves, how to respect ourselves, how to understand ourselves, how to deal with complex emotions, how to understand other people, how to understand how community works, how people work together, understanding relationships, understanding how to deal with somebody else's negative behavior, how to resolve conflicts, how to solve problems. All these things are absolutely critical to a proper education system of an enlightened and abundant society. These things have to be, they're absolutely critical. Obviously, understanding of the world as well, how the world is a closed living system, how everything is kind of interdependent, and the necessity of sharing resources and stuff like that. So that's really the open education system is something that really has to be put in there from the start, So how do things get done? Who's going to clean the roads? Who's going to clean out the drains? Who's going to collect the trash? All this sort of stuff. These kind of questions come up over and over again. Of course, if we don't have technology inhibited by cost or a market system like we have now, there will still be plenty of jobs and tasks that need to be done that people have to do, and it's just simpler for people to do that than it is to build a machine to do that. In most cases, that will be the case. So if people are not getting paid to do that, why are they going to do that? Simply because people don't need to get paid to do that. So therefore, people don't need to get paid to do anything, basically. So if the basics of living, if your lifestyle is guaranteed anyway, you don't have to go and work. You don't have to work 8 hours a day. You don't have to drive 2 hours a day. So pretty much you got all this spare time on your hands anyway to do as you want. That's kind of the whole idea, that we're trying to get away from this poisonous labor system of wasting your life away doing stuff which is really not productive. So obviously with all this spare time, and there's going to be tasks that are going to need to be done, is everyone really just going to lie around watching TV all day while the neighborhood goes to rack and ruin? No, of course it's not going to happen. The community service is a thing that will actually come about organically anyway. But it's something we can, of course, organise and try and promote in the new education system. We need to, if we all say, for example, pledged like 2 or 3 or 4 hours per week to devote to your community, to picking up the trash, to cutting the grass, to sweeping the road, or whatever it is needs to be done, or painting the stuff, whatever needs to be done. Pretty much most people, certainly myself and anyone I speak to, would have no problem doing that anyway. To dedicate 3 or 4 hours to your community for the betterment of everybody, of course everyone would do that. And you can rotate these jobs out. You can have like a roster or whatever, or you can write in how many hours and what days and everything, what suits you or whatever. And then we can administrate that and give out the jobs to the right people and stuff like that. So it's not like you're going to be doing stuff that you can't do. You're not going to like ask somebody to do something that they're just not in their ability. So obviously most of the stuff like lifting things or painting things, most people can do. So once you distribute all these jobs out into the community, and of course you're going to have a much more positive and connected community, so people are going to be rushing to do these jobs because people want to be involved, people want to do something. In general, people are not interested in just lying around doing nothing all day, so people want to be engaged. So the community service is a way of rotating all those arduous tasks out to the community. Obviously, you'd still need leadership in some form. We don't need like this government hierarchical, like fire and brimstone structure anymore. What we need is team leaders. For example, if you're making a movie, you need a director, you need a producer. It works better that way. Imagine if you had no director in a movie or no producer, it would just be a mess. It wouldn't have cohesion. So you do need somebody to put direction and their particular inspiration or angle into projects. So team leaders obviously is something that can happen. It doesn't mean that if I'm the team leader of something, it doesn't mean that I'm the boss of everything. It just means that for that particular project, I am the nominated team leader, and people basically do according to the way I would envision it. And then vice versa, someone else can be a team leader for another project, and I would work for them under their guidance and with their vision. So leadership is a very efficient way of organizing people. And of course, it can still come about without having this whole ruler structure and this sort of, which is kind of ridiculous, really, when you think about it. That you have these politicians who are supposed to be leading everything when they don't know anything about everything, and they rely on sort of advice from experts and that sort of stuff. It's preposterous, really. Team leaders who are people who are expert in that area, of course, you would follow that person because you respect their expertise. So of course, yeah, team leadership is good. And again, it's something that just exists for the length of that project. And in terms of actual big projects, like for example, imagine if you had to build a hospital or you had to build a new road or a bridge. I mean, these are very big projects. Maybe trying to rely on the goodwill of people in just to rotate those kind of tasks in the community it's not going to be very efficient. You know, if somebody's dedicating like 4 hours a week, and then you're trying to get a few of these people to build a big motorway somewhere, it's not going to work. You know, it's not going to work, of course. So what I would propose for that is something that I call like a project pledge, where basically you ask people in the relevant area in that particular community. You say, would you be interested in working on this big project, building this hospital, building this road, or building this school? Would you be interested in that? And are you prepared to pledge a certain amount of time, be it weeks, months, or years, to that project? And then obviously you'll whoever the people that will respond to that, we hope they would respond. But obviously, if people are benefiting from that thing, you're going to get loads of respondents. But to actually keep them invested in that project, in the way the market system works now, you agree to pay somebody a contract, a certain amount of money to keep them interested in that project, and that kind of works quite well. So we wouldn't be able to do that in this, but what we can do is we can have like a pledge system where basically say, okay, you've all these people have agreed to help on this project, right? We would like you all to take pledges just to say that you're going to see this project through until completion. And that, I think, is a way to get people emotionally invested in the project, in completion of the project. And I think we need some sort of structure like that to keep people engaged for long periods of time. Another thing you could have is like an awards system. You can have a community awards system where people who have done really, really good service to the community, or people who just helped you out on the day, or for whatever you're doing, that they can also that you can reward them in some way, not in a monetary way, or not in a way of gifts or anything like that, but really we can have like a symbolic award system. One of the things that another project that I work on is something called Honor Pay, which is basically like a virtual award. It doesn't cost anything, it's free to use, but basically it's like a symbolic way of sending somebody an award to say, hey, I like what you did there. And the way the Honor Pay system works is it's limited. You can't just give out infinite amounts of honours to people, so it gives a particular value. You can only give out one every 7 days, so it has like a limited value. So that's one way. There are other ways you could probably implement that, but like a community award system is one way of giving people a reward for a job well done. So it's like if you have a team leader who is building the hospital, maybe you'd like to give that guy like a thumbs up at the end and say it's a great job. So okay, community award system. Excuse me. A lot of this will actually will happen on the web. There will be obviously the community service tasks, for example, could be rotated out the community. They could be passed around community members, all of whom are signed up on the local website. Something like a community hub is something I think I called it in the F-Day book, was where basically you offer your skills and your interests and what sort of things you would like to get involved with. And then also you can sign up to different tasks, see what tasks are available in the area. You can also see what resources are available to you. If you want to have a new table, for example, you can look around you can search your area and see who has a table, or who's wanting to give a table or whatever, or where you can get one. And then another thing we could do with that web platform would be like a proposal system, like a proposing and seconding system. Again, if you come back to the example of building a hospital, let's say that somebody is suggesting on the website, okay, we need a hospital in this location, and obviously the more people that second that proposal, then the more chance there is of that actually happening. So if somebody says, okay, we need a new motorway over here, and nobody is interested, nobody's backing up that idea, then it's probably not going to happen. But if people are backing it, then it obviously sees, yes, there's an obvious need from the community. And really we need that. We need that structure of internet and the connection of that network to bring about those kind of decisions and those kind of changes. Typically we do that kind of through the magic of government at the moment, where they kind of listen to people and they decide the best way of doing that sort of thing. But actually with the internet, we don't need any of this stuff anymore. We can look after all that ourselves. Actually, we're myself and a few of us are building a new network similar to this community hub idea, which should be available 2017. And it's like again this kind of idea where you can give away the things you want, give away the things you don't want, and you can find the things that you need, whether it's skills or items or whatever. So look out for that Free World Network coming next year in 2017. Okay, finally, like I said, I'm trying to run through these very quickly because I don't want to keep these videos short. Two other things. Arbitration in the cases of disputes. Okay, no matter what we do, no matter what sort of idyllic society we will set up, there's always going to be disputes between one person and another. So that's always going to happen. Obviously, without the self-interest and property ownership, it's going to be a hell of a lot less. But of course, there's still going to be disputes. So how do we resolve disputes without a legal structure or without a hierarchical person to rule on things? Really, what we can do is either, if there's two parties who are disagreeing, both people could nominate an arbitrator, somebody to come in, a random person to come in. They could nominate that and say, okay, I don't agree with you, but I trust this person, so let's bring this person in to help arbitrate the situation. And one of the great things we can do is what I call creative arbitration, is where when two people are arguing, what we should try and do is to get both parties to actually suggest solutions that suit both people. First, they need to understand exactly what is the problem with the other person, what is their reservation about what they're doing or whatever, and then we should get both people to actually to come up with a range of solutions that would actually suit both parties, even if they're completely impossible or improbable, because this gets the sort of it gets the mind thinking in a different way. It beats a neural pathway, if you like, towards finding a solution that does actually suit people. You know, for example, if two people are arguing over a house, like one believes I should have this house, another person believes I should have this house, we say, okay, so what would be a hypothetical, completely ridiculous solution to that, but think of a solution anyway. I say, okay, well let's duplicate this house and let's put two houses beside each other, or let's like move the house, put the house on wheels and move it somewhere else and do that. Even though these ideas are kind of stupid and ridiculous, but what happens is that you're forcing people to beat a path to the solution and not just thinking about what they want. Because at the end of the day, everyone has the absolute equal right to whatever they want, and we need to be able to accommodate people's wants better, as almost as much as our own, not quite as much, but much. And then the last thing then is anti-aggression strategies. Of course, even again with all this lovely idyllic society, you're still going to have problems. You're probably still going to have like serial killers. You're probably still going to have rapists and pedophiles and all the nasty sort of dark side of humanity. It's still going to be there. Of course, we've every reason to think that it's going to be much less than it is now, because we don't have the sort of the market structure, which is basically like making people suffer in indirect ways, even whether through an impoverished upbringing or through stress of parents. All this stuff sort of has a huge effect on people. But with all that gone, then we assume that we're going to have much less of aggression or sexual predation and all these kind of things. But anyway, if it happens, how do we deal with it? We're not going to have like a legal structure. We're not here to be putting people in jail or punishing people. One of the problems of society is we're so quick to punish people, but never to actually try and understand the reasons for that behavior in the first place. That's something we need to change. We need to understand why people behave in a certain way. You have like the rapists and pedophiles and all this sort of stuff. Why do people do these things? How do we create the environment to stop these things from happening, rather than just the knee-jerk reaction of hang 'em high and whatever and all worse than that. So we just have to think about how do we create something where that doesn't need to happen, because we don't. At the end of the day, it's not that we're not against these people. We're against the actions of those people. So let's look at the actions that brought those people to those actions. So that's what we have to look towards. Anyway, obviously, if there is somebody there who's firing a gun and he's shooting people willy-nilly, what are you going to do? You're not just going to sit there and say, oh, okay, well, the man, that's cool, let's relax, chill out, man. That's not going to work. That's not going to go anywhere. So obviously you have to restrain that person, and you're going to restrain that person with whatever means necessary. If somebody's firing a gun and he's killing loads of people, and maybe your only choice is to get a gun and shoot that guy, maybe that's the only option that's available to you, then you're going to do it. Because what has to happen is we have to rely on our common sense. And this is something that we've kind of lost. We rely so much on external agencies to solve our problems for us that we've forgotten our own common sense and how to deal with things effectively ourselves. So if we are in a situation where somebody is making life miserable for other people, we're going to stop that person from doing that. Okay, first we're going to restrain them in whatever way is necessary or whatever way is appropriate, and obviously we'll try and rehabilitate that person in the whatever possible way we can. So that's it. That's the anti-aggression things. It's just really the application of common sense. Every situation is different. How you react to that is just common sense. Okay. Okay, that's pretty much it. These are kind of like just a list of practicalities, the things of how things would kind of work in the real world of an open economy once we get there. We just need to stop relying on outside agencies is probably the biggest message from all this, and we need to trust in ourselves and become self-responsible, become self-reliant, self-determining. This is basically going to make us better, happier people, and a happier people is going to make better communities. So this is the way, certainly the direction we need to go. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you haven't seen the first two videos, check them out, please. The problems is the first one, the solutions is the next one. I'll have the final part on next week, and I'm really looking forward to that. And if you have any feedback on this, please leave a comment down below, and hopefully I'll see you next time in the next video. Thank you. Hello there, it's Colin Turner again, and this is the last video in the 4-part series, The Open Economy. In the last 3 videos, I've tried my best to cover everything that's in the book in terms of the problems, the solutions, and how the open economy would work. In this video, I'm going to actually try and talk about how to actually make the open economy happen today, how to bring it into being, how to do that all-important transition that we're all talking about to get there, to get to this world that we all want to see so badly. So, like I say, I've tried my best to cover everything in the thing. Obviously, it's not so easy to cover everything that's in the book. If you want to find out more, check out the Into the Open Economy book. You can download it on Amazon, and that should give you more you can put it down in black and white, all the stuff that I've been talking about, and probably some stuff I've left out, and maybe some new ideas that are in there too. One of the other things that's in that book, actually, that I haven't really done in the video, is I've kind of tried to visualize scenarios where the open economy would work in a kind of a fictional sense. Something that I also did in the F-Day book, which you might have heard of, is it's like a dramatization of events of how this kind of thing would happen and how it would come to being. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But yes, so really, like I say, I've tried to cover everything. Check out the book if you want to find out more. So on this one, I'm going to deal with the transition, how we actually make this happen today. There's a few things I can say about that, but one of the most important things is if I had to sum it up in one word, there's one word that would actually encapsulate what transition is about, how we actually get there. And I'm going to write this word on the board in a minute, and this word is going to invoke an automatic response from you, and I want you to capture that response. And because we're going to talk about that, because it's very important how we react to how we act to new ideas. We all have conditioned responses. Somebody says something like, if somebody says the word communism, for example, we automatically have a conditioned automatic response to that, generally a negative one, whereas a lot of the stuff of communism is actually quite positive and quite similar to what we're talking about. But the conditioned response is something that brings it. Anyway, like I say, just hang on there for a minute, and I'm going to write this word on the board. So the first thing I can say about transition is that it's actually already happening. We're already in this transition. The fact that I'm making this video, that you're watching this video, means that the transition is already happening. I've thought about these ideas. You're thinking about these ideas now. Other people have different stages of questioning the system that we're in, and the different stages of actually designing the new systems. There are plenty of other people out there with really good ideas as well. You could look up the likes of Jacques Fresco and the Venus Project, or the Zeitgeist Movement, Peter Joseph, Michael Tellinger and the Ubuntu Party, the Money Free Party. There's loads of groups out there which are kind of espousing more or less the same thing in kind of slightly different flavors. One of the things that's important for what I think makes the open economy slightly different, or maybe more doable from my point of view, is this thing that we're going to be talking about in a minute. And right, okay, so let's go back to the how it's already happening. Okay, the fact that we're talking about this now means that we're already in transition. Maybe it's a very early part of that transition, but we are in it. This is definitely happening. Other examples of how this is happening now is, you might look at, if you're familiar with computing, you know about open source software. This is really important because it's a great analogy of how society can work, not just computer systems. You have the likes of Linux operating system. If you're not familiar with it, I guarantee you've used Linux operating system in some shape or form. Most websites, for example, use Linux as an operating system. So maybe you're not, even though you're not familiar with Linux, I promise you have been using it lots and lots of times. Linux has been basically designed by loads of volunteer developers all over the world. Maybe something like 150,000 people contribute to the Linux project. And it's all voluntarily, and this is kind of what we're talking about. This is basically the power of group thinking, the power of group interest, doing stuff voluntarily and creating something that really is brilliant, that works. There are other examples, like the Google Chrome was started as a open source project, and also Android, which is the operating system on most phones nowadays, is actually also open source project. So this is basically what we're talking about. An open economy can be lots of people contributing and making something amazing at the end. Other ways that the open economy is happening is, if you step outside of your traditional market system, look at the way we are behaving with our friends, with our loved ones and our families. The way we sort of behave, we naturally cooperate and share and do things together for that, and we don't ask for payment, we don't hope for payment, we don't seek reward. We more or less we kind of do things unconditionally, and we have this in our little group. So we all have our little exclusive clubs, for example, of our families and our friends, where we all do things for each other, help each other out. And this is basically a microcosm of what I'm talking about. It's basically where all these little groups are helping each other out. If we just really expand that group to encompass not just our friends and family, but to encompass our entire communities, our entire neighborhoods, and ultimately the world at large. If we all use this kind of well, if you like, it's like a social contract where we kind of, if we expand the social contract to include this basic looking after each other as a basic courtesy, like we do with politeness and manners, for example. We all say please and thank you, and we're generally nice to each other. If we even expand that to say, well, let's not just be nice to each other, let's actually help each other do all that stuff too. And when we see that coming back to us, when it's reciprocated, if we're helping people and we find that people are helping us, then of course that's a feedback thing, and it's going to get better and better. We're going to feel better about doing that. Obviously, when we benefit from something, we continue doing that thing. So there's just a couple of ways in which it's already happening. The open source movement is like an analogy of how it can work in society, and of course the friends and families thing, the little clubs, is basically unconditional sharing in small ways. We just have to grow that group, and that's it. So here's what it's about. Then this, like I say, this. If I had to sum it up in one word, what we're talking about, I'm going to write it on the board now. This word is going to elicit a response. I want you to hold on to that, and let's talk about that. Share. We're talking about sharing things. We're talking about sharing the world. We're talking about sharing our skills, our knowledge, our resources with each other. But I bet you most of the people who are there, when you hear the word share, you automatically equal that to loss. Most people, and understandably, when they hear the word share, it means that I'm going to have less. It means I'm going to lose out on something. I'm going to suffer, even slightly, as a result of sharing. But what if I told you that is just a conditioned response of a scarce market system, the one that we're operating at the moment? We're more or less conditioned to get as much as possible, to accumulate as much as possible, because we don't know the future, and we might have to have a stockpile of things or whatever for future disasters. This is where the greed mentality comes from. It's scarcity in an uncertain future. Okay, so it's good to stockpile things when you're not sure about the future. That's perfectly rational. But in an open economy, when we all see it working, when it's actually established and when it's going well, then there's no more uncertain future. I mean, well, apart from natural catastrophes and stuff like that, but in general, there's no uncertain future in terms of society, in terms of finding the things that meet your needs and getting the stuff that you need to live a good, happy and fulfilled life. So therefore, the fear of loss really comes from this market scarcity driven mentality, where we think that we start panicking. Oh God, we're gonna lose out here, and so this is where this idea of where sharing equals loss. So sharing is selfless act, and therefore we're going to lose out on that, and we're going to suffer as a result. Okay, so in an open economy, once it's established, once everyone is understanding how it works and why it's better for everyone to behave this way, then we don't think about loss at all, because obviously we're not going to be giving away more than we have. We're only going to give it. We're going to be sharing our excess. If you have 20 apples that you grew in your garden, for example, you're not going to give away 20 apples or more than 20 apples. You're going to take whatever ones you want yourself. So maybe you're going to give away 5 apples. I don't know. For example, it's not about losing out. It's about sharing your excess, because we can all create this abundance together if we're all doing it. If I have 20 apples in my garden, maybe like all my neighbor in the community, we all have we all have apple trees, for example, or we have a community orchard or something like that. If we're all working together towards that, there's going to be more apples than people can eat once we're sort of more organized and stuff. So, and we share our excess to the next village, for example. Okay, so there you go. So while we automatically believe that sharing equals loss, in an open economy, sharing actually is what replaces the current market system. So rather than grabbing and accumulating now, sharing becomes automatic. It becomes a basic courtesy. It becomes our social contract. This is how we operate. Okay, so how can we do sharing today? Because obviously we're still locked inside this market system, because everyone still agrees to use the market system. So we're kind of locked into that for now. So what things can we do? Well, there's actually loads of things we can do to increase our own sharing behavior without losing out, and ways that can actually benefit us and also can spread the word. One of them is setting up a community sharing circle. If you look up on the freeworlder.com blog site, you'll see information about that. It's basically an idea where you set up a kind of an exclusive club, like what I was talking about earlier, but you set it up between your neighbors and your community, and it has a little air of exclusivity. So like people are kind of only sharing within this circle, and that gives it a sort of a prestigious sort of effect in people's minds. So it's like something that's kind of worth joining because people are benefiting from joining that. So the idea is you go in there and you contribute your skills and knowledge and resources, and you also benefit from skills and knowledge and resources from other people, which is great. Like if you have to, if you want somebody to do your garden while you do their like bookkeeping or something like that, we can work all this very easily in a sharing circle. That's one way of doing it. Another way, obviously, is to try and become self-sufficient. A lot of people it's really big into this now, and they want to get off the grid. They want to become self-sufficient, which is absolutely fair enough. Just one word of caution with being self-sufficient. Obviously, we can't be too self-centered in this thing, because that's going to bring us more or less more of the same thing where we are. We do need to rely on other people. So even if you're talking about being self-sufficient, that doesn't mean being an absolute island. It's better really in the long run if we're sort of engaging with our communities and doing stuff like that. But there's loads of things you can do to be self-sufficient. You can catch your own rainwater, you can generate your own electricity, you can grow your own food in any different ways. If you look up YouTube, you'll find loads of different very cheap and free options of ways of doing that. YouTube actually and the internet in general are fantastic ways of educating yourself, and that's the next thing. Is educate yourself with new skills, upskill yourself. We're so often locked in the mindset that you have to do a course for this or you have to learn this skill, but actually most skills are actually pretty easy. And if you go to YouTube, for example, I don't know if your car is broken or you need to change the battery in your car and you don't know how to do that, go to YouTube, you're going to find a video about that in seconds, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, well, it's actually not that difficult. And there's loads of things like that where you can actually repair things yourself. It's a great way of being self-sufficient, but also upskilling yourself. And this is great. It empowers you when you have more skills like that. Tool libraries is another great thing that we see around everywhere. There's these things springing up. It's basically like somebody who has a spare premises. They keep people donate equipment to that, and so you can go and borrow a lawnmower, or you can borrow like some kind of a garden tool, or you can borrow a computer or something like that from these things, or a specialized tool for repairing your home or something like that. Tool libraries are a great thing, and the whole library concept, should not be limited to books. Why limited? Why is it just limited to books? We can basically library everything from tools to cars to computers to furniture, clothes, shoes. All these things will eventually become in libraries. You won't be going out and buying the latest shoes or dress or suit, but where you can just go down to the library and find one that fits you and it's in perfect condition, and you can borrow that for a while and bring it back and somebody else can have it then. So all this thing about it's the ladies who all have like different dresses in the wardrobe. I mean, it's kind of wasteful, so it would make more sense if you could borrow these things and from a library and bring them back, and then you have you don't need to have a huge wardrobe with 100 dresses in it. You just need to have a couple of things, and you can take the rest from a library. So libraries are a great way of promoting the idea as well. If you don't have a tool library in your area, think about setting one up maybe. And the library concept itself is so it's already in people's minds. People understand how a library works, and so when you say, okay, it's not a book library, it's a tool library, people get it straight away, and it's cool. So libraries are a great way to go, great way to the future. Using open source software on your computer is a really good way as well, of course, of being self-sufficient, and also supporting that open source business model. Because if we're supporting these by using Linux software, by using, I use some great programs like Calibre, for example, for making books. This is a brilliant free program. There's also alternatives to Photoshop like GIMP, or just like an alternative to Photoshop. It's completely free. In some ways, it's better than Photoshop. It has more options to it. You have OpenOffice or LibreOffice, which are like Microsoft Office, only they're completely free. They're completely open source. So support open source in any way you can, because it's free to use and you're supporting this really, really good idea. Repair cafes is a thing that's kind of taken off quite a bit in Europe. Certainly in Northern Europe is basically an idea, again, where somebody has maybe a spare business premises or an open business premises, where you actually set up get people who are good at repairing things, people who can fix watches, people who can fix your vacuum cleaner, people who can fix your phones or laptops or whatever. Get these people in a sort of a cafe environment, and then you go and bring your broken thing to there, and you sit down, have a cup of coffee, and you have a chat while the guy fixes, or girl, fixes your thing there in front of you. It's a completely different take on the whole business of repair. It's a completely social and community experience. I actually haven't seen one myself, but I've heard great reports about them. So repair cafes, again, if you don't have one in your area, think about setting one up. You know, if you have a special skill, a repair skill, it's a great thing to do. So that's pretty much all there is to consider about the transition. Like I say, the main thing, if you can take advice from those other pointers, that's useful, but the main thing really is sharing. And like I say, sharing does not equal loss. We have to put that mindset away, because this is not helpful. This is basically a conditioned response. But by sharing, we're also talking about sharing the ideas, not just sharing your excess, sharing your skills and knowledge with your neighbors and community, but also sharing these ideas, sharing the stuff in this book, sharing the stuff you see on all the other websites. I mean, if you go to any social media now, there's loads of change action groups happening now. They're everywhere. So don't be afraid to talk about that with your friends. Get people sharing that information. So this word "share" is really where this begins. You know, lots of people like to talk about, well, let's build this build a prototype city, or let's build lots of eco communities. And there's loads of little practical reasons why these are difficult to do. They're difficult to do well. Certainly small intentional communities can be problematic because the numbers of people are too small. You know, you can't have a really successful community with 20 people, or even with 50 or 100 people. You need to have that redundancy of loads of extra people. You know, you can't have like a community with one engineer. You have to have a community with 20 engineers, for example. You need to have big numbers, so you have that redundancy built right in. Also building big prototype cities, which I know there's quite a few movements out there who are talking about building cities. Again, it sort of contradicts itself, because you have to basically build these cities with money. Now you need money, you need crowdfund to do that, and when you do that, you haven't really proven your point. And even if you do prove your point and you build an amazing city where everything is facilitated for free, this city can kind of become some sort of precarious utopian thing which could be liable to attack or abuse from outside. So I would be a little bit skeptical about that. But anyway, it's everyone has different ideas about that. But personally, we don't need to do any of this massive, huge, big effort. All we need really to do is just billions of little small acts of sharing. Billions and billions of small acts of sharing is what is going to precipitate this change very, very quickly. Once we start engaging with the sharing economy, we're going to be benefiting from it. Other people are going to be benefiting from it. They're going to learn from it. We're going to learn more from it. So it's going to grow very, very, very quickly in that. So we are in transition already because we're talking about this. But to bring it further, we have to start sharing as part of our daily habit. Okay, that's pretty much wrapped up for the series for the moment. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've certainly really enjoyed making these videos, and for me, it's like it's a learning experience as well. I'm learning all the time. I'm improving on my ideas. I hope I'm putting myself across well. Please keep going and keep learning and keep sharing the videos, keep spreading the ideas. Go on to the Free World Charter, sign the Free World Charter, spread that idea around. Do anything that you can just to start people, get people into the sharing mind, and to start creating a better world for everyone. So thanks very much for listening, and take care. Bye bye.